Well, hello, everybody. How exciting it is today for me to be sitting facing a screen to talk with Shane Vieau, who is also facing a screen, who sadly can't be actually with us in the theater today because he is across the pond getting ready to attend the BAFTAs because Frankenstein and his role in it as part of the production design set decoration group. They've been nominated for BAFTA. So Shane, who is interestingly enough a resident of Chester, is sitting in his house and I'm sitting in the playhouse, and we're going to have a chat today. As some of you who have attended these in conversations before know, that our objective is really to get to know the person and let that person tell their story. So as I said, I mean, it's almost impossible to introduce you, Shane, because your portfolio of work is so vast, but and your title is, I'm not a film person, so I sometimes get it wrong. Set direction. I think the nomination for Frankenstein this year for you is production design and set decoration. Did I get that right?
That is correct. I am what you would call a set decorator. Some people use set direction, but set decorator would probably be the best word to describe it.
Okay, so that's a great term. Can we dig into the term, and can you, because I think the nomination says production design for Tamara Deverell, you for set direction. Can you talk a little bit about what those terms mean so that we can appreciate your craft?
Sure. A production designer is responsible for the overall look of the film. The designer would have firsthand, I would say, a firsthand line to the director and the cinematographer to sort of discuss and work out the look of the film. A set decorator works with the production designer and the director, but mostly the designer, to work out the color palette and film and furniture and furnishings and stuff for the sets.
And I bet the term "and stuff" is actually sort of rich and diverse. So do you find things and make things and then place them? Is it all of that?
All of the above.
Okay.
You know, set decoration is a really sort of vast category because we literally do a lot of stuff. It's not really specific. When we go in to build a factory, we sort of build everything in the factory if we're building everything from scratch. So we have to sort of do a lot of research and technology research to sort of figure out what would be encompassed in that set. So it's not really like interior design. It is mostly injecting the life and personality in that set.
Okay, so we'll dig into more of this when we talk about what you've done with Frankenstein, but I want to go back to your beginning. I understand
Sure.
You've been in Bel Air Park in Dartmouth, so you're a native Nova Scotian.
Woo!
And yeah, exactly. So, but I think of the journey from that to the man who's sitting talking with me now, who's an Academy Award winner for The Shape of Water, and you've had more nominations than I can believe, and now again nominated this year for a BAFTA and for the Oscars, and on and on. What happened in between? How did you get from Dartmouth to being in London tonight for getting ready for the BAFTAs?
So true enough, I grew up in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And, I grew up in a neighborhood called Bel Air Park, which was absolutely idyllic. It was a place that had 150 kids on my street. Someone was always looking after you, looking around you. It was always a place to, grow. And I really enjoyed my early life there. From there, I went to Memorial University for a few years. I didn't graduate, but I definitely enjoyed my time there. And I kind of made my way over towards British Columbia and spent 20 years there. I sort of floated through jobs, a wide variations of things that I won't really get into.
Oh,
But
throw a couple of bones, a couple of examples.
I worked at Ernst& Young very briefly. I worked at a custom photography lab for many years. I managed a hair salon. I did construction. Um, a really, really wide scope of stuff. Nothing really that sort of caught my fancy in any way. But when I was 30, I was encouraged by a friend to go do a commercial one weekend with the art department. All I did really was drive a van, but I became hooked. I absolutely love that. And from there, what I did was I quit the job that I was in, and I spent 2 years really working off the back of a truck to sort of try and get in the union. It was sort of hard at the time to get in. And once I did, I started working my way up. It wasn't until someone offered me a job as a decorator on a pilot one year. And I have to say that I wasn't qualified to do the pilot. I was just a dresser at the time, which is just strictly a laborer. But it was from there that I actually got the bug. And I spent many, many years doing a lot of lower budget television and small features. And I think one of my first big breaks that was a commercial success was Juno. And it was a very, very small film. And, slowly but surely, I put my way through the paces and worked my way up. And my sort of big foray into it was working with a designer named Tom Sanders on a movie called Red Riding Hood. It never really was a successful film, but I love the process because Tom Sanders, who's getting honored this year in the ADG Awards, which is the guild, the arts guild in Los Angeles. He passed away a few years ago. He was my mentor, but he was one of the best production designers in the world. He built everything through models. He was tactile. And so I learned a lot on the approach to set decoration was being more tactile, which means the physical aspect of feeling things and stuff in approach. And so I went from there and, I did that show with him. And after we finished, he basically said, I really liked working with you, but you're not ready. And so he went back down to the States. And it wasn't until I think 3 or 4 years later that he called me to go do Crimson Peak in Toronto. And it was from there that I really feel artistically that I was really able to make my mark. And so from Crimson Peak on, I stayed in Toronto for the next 10 years. And I was slowly able to build up what I would call a good filmography to be able to compete on a wider market. And sort of that's how I started.
What a journey. And, when he said, I don't think you're ready, did that feel awful or inspiring?
For the first few minutes, it's hard to hit, because he was my mentor. But I get it. He was honest. And from there, I took exactly what he said. And, it was inspiring for me. I've got to say that I love being challenged and I love being the underdog because that just means people aren't expecting you. And so I absolutely adore that.
Did you know in that moment what he meant? Like what ready would look like and what you didn't have to be called ready?
Honestly, no.
Oh,
Because you always feel like you've done your best job and you've done your best work. So for me, every time I go to do a show, it's always the challenge of how to heighten it, how to make it better, how to make it sort of pop and stand. And so that's the challenge that I take every time.
and I think obviously he saw something in you though that was worthy because he called you up.
He did. And I have to say that he kept in touch. He did not go silent on me. Every time I got the chance, I would travel down to see him with whatever he's working on to ingratiate myself to him and really learn more.
Yeah. You know, I think I called it your portfolio, you called it filmography. And when I look at your filmography going from Crimson Peak, I haven't seen, but certainly I saw Spotlight and Juno, and then to more recent times, Dune 2, and now Frankenstein. Um, the diversity in there makes me wonder a bunch of things. Number one, do you apply to be the set decorator designer person, or does somebody reach out to you? Is it a waiting game or a hustling game?
It's kind of all the above, quite
Okay.
honestly. You know, I have to say that I love staying with designers that I love to work with. And, I've been very blessed to work with some amazing Canadian designers who have been able to make their mark on the world market. And that is a blessing for me. I hunt down everyone that I work with. Some people come to me, but because the world is so big with what we do, if people don't know who you are or that you want to work with them, we're artists and we have egos and stuff like that. So you really have to ingratiate yourself and sort of introduce yourself and see if it might be something that might be a fit. I love the chase. I do love finding designers. If I had to wait for everyone to come to me, I don't think it would, I don't think I'd be standing here today.
So what was the specific journey for Frankenstein, which is the movie everybody's about to see? Were you pursued or did you have to chase?
So I've been working with Guillermo since 2015, 2014. And so he has been very good about asking for me uh, every time that he comes to do something in the last 10 years. He's been absolutely wonderful. We've also been blessed to have an amazing designer, Tamara Deverell, who I came into contact with in 2020, I believe, for Nightmare Alley. And that was our first time working together. And, we were introduced through Guillermo to work together. And it turned out to be a really, really lovely fit.
Uh, well, lucky for all of us that that actually happened. So now you're, as I said to people at the beginning, you're in London. You're wondering whether or not um, your work is going to be credited with a BAFTA. And how does it, when you're an artist in the work you do, how does it feel to be nominated?
So for me, it is really humbling because I have to say that Tamara and I stand representing upwards of 1,000 people in the art department. We are really blessed to be the ones honored with that. And so I, I mean this with all seriousness when I say it's not about the win for me. It's about the nomination being recognized by your peers. It is extremely, again, that I said, humbling and a blessing to be there. And for me, it's nice to stand with these people. It's lovely to go to the event before the BAFTAs so that you can actually mingle with your peers. And that is so important for me because we don't get to do that regularly. You know, I live in Nova Scotia, to come together with people that work all around the world, we don't get to do that. And so for me, I love a sense of community. I love bonding with other decorators and meeting new designers. That's the real privilege of being there.
Well, and I love the fact that you indicated that if you and Tamara stand on the stage to get the award, let's keep our fingers crossed that you're really standing on the shoulders of so many other people. And, somebody like me, I go to a movie and if I watch the credits always to the end, which I usually do because sometimes there are little outtakes thrown in or there's some interesting music going on. There are so many people involved in making a movie of the size and scope of Frankenstein. And anyway, so I appreciate that you appreciate those. You, as you say, you've worked with Guillermo del Toro before. Um, would you have to like the content of a movie if he asked you to work on it, or would you work on a movie about raisins if he said he wanted to do that?
Anytime that man would call me to do something, I don't care, I would do it. He is extremely supportive of our department. He's an amazing communicator. He has such a wealth of knowledge. And so it is such a learning experience every time you're able to work with him. And I've got to say that anytime that man calls, I would be there.
Well, I don't blame you. I think I shared with you before, Shane, that I saw a number of interviews with him as I was getting ready for talking to you, and he's very impressive. And I think he's been often referred to as a purist in the film world, as somebody who won't use AI. And you used the term earlier, he's tactile. He wants real things, right?
Yes.
So I would guess that that is both his brilliance and also presents challenges along the way in terms of creating what's in his head.
So I'll just give you a little example. In Frankenstein, in the apartment, and when he moves to the lab in his bedroom, there is a series of about 15 wax models that appear through the sets. You know, those wax models are period correct because back in the day they would anatomically carve them out of wax. And Guillermo found a woman, I believe on Instagram, who makes these models in Paris, and he personally commissioned all of them. Like, they weren't paid for by the show; those were paid for by Guillermo. Those are his models, and he wanted those for the show. That is the man that he is. And so when it comes to putting the best stuff on camera, he'll pay for stuff out of his pocket just because he loves them and that they're going to add to the show.
That's a wonderful insight. I love knowing that. I heard him say once that some people think of a movie as eye candy, but eye candy is pretty, and that he wants to create what he calls eye protein, images that will tell a story. And he also said, and I think this will resonate with you, every frame in the movie is a painting, but it has to move. So then you have to create that.
Yes.
The paintings that move.
Yes. Okay. So, I'll just give you a prime example. So there's a relationship between costumes and set decoration where my focus is not to make my stuff stand out. My focus is to make the costumes look beautiful and pop. So I homogenize a lot of my colors and a lot of my palettes with the designer to make sure that the costumes stand out and pop and look like paintings, which inevitably is what happens when you look at paintings with people in them. So you'll notice in the movie that every one of those costumes stand out against the backdrops and my furniture and the colors that we've chosen. And that is in essence what we do to heighten the painting.
It's so fascinating to have you explain that. And I know, in half an hour or so, people are going to start to watch the movie. And the story of Frankenstein is known, so it's not like we're going to give too much away, but I do want to ask you some specifics about the movie.
Sure.
Because, I want people to watch the movie as it's meant to be watched, but I'd also like them to look out for some things, or when they see something, go, oh, I know that Shane was involved in building that. So what would you say was your biggest challenge in creating the world that Frankenstein lives in?
So it's kind of boring to talk about it, but the technical, physical way of shooting the locations in Scotland and in London was a huge challenge in itself, because you're shooting in castles and buildings that are hundreds of years old and that are 2 to 3 hours apart. and you're shooting a different set every day. So the movement of this and the amount of furniture that needs to be shipped, everything, just the logistics of it is absolutely mind-boggling. It's kind of boring to talk about it, as I said, but getting everything there, getting it all together when the director's not going to see it until the day is a challenge amongst itself, because for the most part, when you're in studio, Guillermo would walk through the sets every day. He would see them every day. He would tweak colors here, tweak colors there. We never had that privilege in the UK. We were there for 6 weeks shooting almost a different set every day, and just the movement was mind-boggling.
So in addition to that challenge of logistics, you also have an actor in this film who has to be made up every day.
Yes.
As Frankenstein. And from what I've learned, I think it took 10, 12 hours to get him ready.
Yeah,
How do you figure that in, get the set ready, have him ready, and everybody in the right place at the right time?
Jacob did such an amazing job on that show. And, he would have to be there at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, and we wouldn't get him till around noon. So a lot of times that guy would be there over 20 hours. It's a really, really long process. So we literally would move our schedule around to make sure that the creature was, when he was ready, that we were ready to go. And, that can be challenging at times, but just the process of the build with the prosthetics was such an incredible feat. And Jacob was so patient to do it. And it was really a marvel to see.
Here's a question you may not know the answer, but knowing you probably do. I heard how long it took to get him made up. Did it take also a long time to unmake him up?
Not nearly as long.
Okay.
I think there's preserving of certain pieces and stuff like that, but there was definitely a few hours involved, I believe. I mean, I'm not going to stand on record with that, but it would definitely not be as many hours to get him prepared.
Now, you mentioned shooting in Scotland and London for this film, but I believe you also did a big construction in a parking lot in Toronto. Can you talk about that and why it had to be what it had to be?
We decided to build the ship in a parking lot outside the studio, right down on the waterfront, at Cinespace. And, the reason why we built it there was because we needed proximity to studio. We definitely changed shooting schedules a lot based on weather to be outside. And, it would not be the most ideal place to put that ship, but that thing was a monstrosity. The amount of steel that would go into the building of the gimbal and the amount of wood that went into the carving of that piece, it was definitely a huge build. And I will say that in the end, it was a blessing to put it there, because if it was in a sort of parking lot 20 or 30 kilometers away, logistically, it would have been a nightmare.
And was it Del Toro who said, we must build this ship to scale, it must be real?
Absolutely. Yes. Again, he is all about authenticity and real. And, the more practical, the more physical, the more we can make that for him. It just gives him a lot more latitude when he's shooting. So he's not cornered into something. So having everything open to him was definitely ideal.
And, Chester's a sailing community, so there will be people watching this movie who know about ships, even old ones. And they might look at the ropes and the rigging, and what can you tell them that they'll see?
We had a technical advisor named Jim Dines, who is from the UK. And Jim is a generational sailor. And Jim has amassed a vast knowledge of how to build. And, Jim goes all around the world, works a lot in Malta, building these ships to make them period authentic. So when it came to the roping and the rigging, there was definitely a lot of conversations about it. But Jim brought over a team of 4 or 5 people, and then my department would sort of help him a little bit. But he was able to tie all the ropes and hang everything, which is something that I and my team would never have been able to do. He made it look very, very easy. But those ropes were definitely authentic to the period. The sail was definitely authentic to the period. And what was great about Jim was because he had such a knowledge of rigging on how to work the ships that he actually trained the extras. He spent time with them and actually was on the ship and in the film, helping everyone do the rigging and what they needed to do when certain events came up. So it was definitely great to have him there.
And I bet it was a thrill for him too.
Again, he is such a master at what he does. He absolutely loved it. And he was up to every challenge that we asked him.
Now you talk about master, and we know that Del Toro is really committed to craft and trades and skills and all that. And your example of getting those wax models that he commissioned and purchased and paid for himself. You also told me a story about bedspreads. Can you share a little bit about that? Because people might, as they're watching the movie, pay attention to the bedspreads.
It probably didn't get enough screen time as it really deserved, but we created 2 bedspreads, one blue and one red. And the one red one was Victor's mother, and then the blue was his father's. And, we had a company called Lock and Something. Again, I forget their names, but they're known as the Queen's Embroiderers. They are world renowned. They are the go-to people, but they took this bedspread on as a challenge. They usually don't do things this big, but they do every sort of high-end castle and house in London. And they've been in business for hundreds of years, and they do everything by hand, which I absolutely love. And you can look at stitching that's done on a machine, and then you can look at stitching that's done by hand, and trust me, you can see the difference. And it was such a beautiful thing to have because it really added to the authenticity of what we're doing. And I think at the end, Guillermo really, really loved that, and it really added to the show.
So here's, an uninformed question, but I have watched the movie, and so many, as Del Toro says, paintings that move, and I know that you are behind all those. So many, and we're talking about something as intricate as a bedspread and something as huge and vast as a 2-scale ship. So here's the kind of crazy Liz Crocker question. Where do you begin? My guess is you don't necessarily start at the beginning, or maybe you do, but how do you even manage the tasks?
The way we approach builds and stuff like that, it's like engineering and building blocks. You start with the shapes, you work into the color, you work into the aging, and then you do adjustments when it gets on set. It really is mostly technical. There's a lot of creativeness when it comes to color, but once you know Guillermo's palette and you know where to go, it really becomes really like engineering. It really is like building blocks.
So in Frankenstein, was there something that you had to build or create that was maybe amongst the most challenging thing you've ever had to do?
The biggest challenge on that show is the biggest challenge with Guillermo is that nothing goes into that set without proper aging so that it sits within the set. Like, I wouldn't just build a piece of furniture, paint it, and put it in. That would never work. If you take the chair that the old man was sitting on in the cottage, that chair was specifically designed for that set. It was a replication of an old antique piece, which you would never find anymore. They're extremely rare. But just to sculpt it, to give it perfect sculpture and to age it and to make it sit within a set is a huge process. It's like 6 to 8 processes to get that piece in, but that's with everything. That's not like even to the smallest piece of lab glass. If you look in Frankenstein's apartment, you'll notice that every single piece of glass is hand tinted. It's not clear glass like it would have been. We had to heighten it to make it sit within the apartment more appropriately. So it was stained more of a tobacco. And so in that apartment, hundreds of pieces would be in there. So you would have to hand stain. And it's not just one glaze, it's appropriate of 3 different colors of a tobacco glaze to get that to sit right. And so when you look at the microcosm of just those pieces, every set has hundreds and hundreds of pieces within them. So that would be the approach every time. And so you have so many people behind the scenes working with me to get those pieces ready to sit in the set.
So if somebody's watching this interview and they're having a little internal conversation that's starting to be, oh my God, this sounds so fascinating. I want to do this. I want to become Shane. What would you say to them? How to begin? How to get the life work and the skills and the eye and the sense to be able to do what you do?
You know, there is a basic sense of training that you can do when you apply to a union to get in. In Canada, most film is union oriented. So you would have to sort of apply to get into a union. But before you do that, you know, I volunteered, like, even when I was getting into the union, I would do a short film for free every weekend if I could. You know, anyone that asked me, I was always there. I was always trying to help because every time you do something, you learn something new, you have different requirements, you know, and for me, it's perseverance. You want to do something, you can actually do something. I have no formal training in art department. You know, I didn't go to school for it. And so for me, if you really love what you do, you'll get there through pure perseverance. And that is something that I'm very proud of because it's really all about learning tools. And for me, if I don't have it, I'll go try and learn it. There is an innateness to what we do. You know, just a little story for me is that, you know, when it comes to picking colors from a house or something, I'm an idiot. I will struggle with it every single time. You know, last year at Robin's Flower Shop, when she went away on vacation, I decided to do a little reno over there for her. I struggled with the color for her back room for a week. And I finally had to ask Nicola to come over and pick the color for me. And she kind of looked at me and said, "Are you an idiot? You pick colors for a reason." Sometimes I just struggle when it comes to real life, but when it comes to film, I'm sort of in my zone. So the reality is, if you want to do something, you can actually do it. But, you know, in film, you have to volunteer, get people to see your face, get to know people. And once you get into the community, you can really grow.
Well, great advice for this line of work, or really almost anything. You know, I'm curious about something, and you may not want to even comment on this, but I looked at all the categories that Frankenstein is nominated for, and there are 9 different categories. And I think I have them: best movie, best adapted screenplay, best actor in a supporting role, cinematography, music written for motion picture, production design, set decoration, makeup and hair, sound, costume, but not director. And we've talked about how committed and brilliant and passionate Guillermo del Toro is. Did that surprise you?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
But I also need to preempt that by saying he was nominated for the DGA this year. So even though he wasn't nominated for the Oscars, he was definitely up there with the Directors Guild, and which I think is extremely well deserved. You know, I have to say that when I went back to saying it's a privilege to be there for the BAFTAs, it doesn't it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best film. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best director. We have a very large branch at the Oscars. It's over 4,000 people. It's really hard to predict sometimes the way people are going to vote. And, count your blessings if you're there. If you're not, it does not mean you're not the best. It really is a blessing to be there. It really goes up to a lot of different factors.
Yeah.
It's not just who's the best. And I really have to say that it can really be kind of a crapshoot the day what becomes popular and what is not. Just because I love a film doesn't mean you're going to love a film. People become very divisive about films, and it's polarizing sometimes, and that's the way it is, and you just have to go with you that year.
Well, and in the Olympics are also on at the same time, and there's so much talk about the competition and needing the mental discipline to compete.
Yes.
So maybe it's also true in the world of film that you go and do your best work and take satisfaction in that.
Yes. Yeah, it is a challenge every day in film when you're dealing with artistic things. Me having to stand on a set and someone saying, yeah, I don't like this set. It happens all the time. People are criticizing you for absolutely everything. And for me, there's never one way to do something. There's 100 different ways to do something. It's just the way you approach it with your designer in order to accomplish a piece. All you can do is do your best and try and do what's best for the director and the cinematographer and the designer. And that's your job. And you have to have a thick skin. I definitely have a thick skin about what I do. I definitely eat my feelings at night. We tend to gain a lot of weight during shoot, but it is what it is.
Yeah, well, very, very humbling of you to say all that. So let's go back to Shane, the person who lives just down the street. What do you do in your spare time for fun? Do you watch movies? Can you watch a movie for fun?
I definitely love watching movies.
Okay.
I'm an extremely emotional person. I get affected by film all the time. The simplest thing can make me cry, But what I do love about being at home in Chester is that it is extremely grounding. There is an amazing community, people of here that will surround and support you, whatever you do. I had to drop my car off this morning to get serviced, and I walked home from the garage, and literally I had 20 people say good morning, and that is such a wonderful thing to have in the world today. And in my spare time, I just love being at home, being around the community, and just being.
Well, great. And we may come back to that theme, but I think you also told me that you also love New Zealand. And
Yeah.
You have a friend there who has a farm.
For the last, I think, 2 or 3 shows, I've made a habit of going to New Zealand after I've finished a show wherever I am, and sitting on a farm being what I would call a woofer. And I would mow lawns, look after the sheep, look after the fruit trees, look after the chickens, and just do that all day. And what is amazingly grounding about that is that it just gives you a different sense of being connected with nature. And, for my mental health, it's such a beautiful thing because it clears your palate of the last show that you've done. You let go of all the tensions and everything associated with that show. And it is, I couldn't recommend it more. I don't know why more people just don't go work on a farm after they've had a stressful experience with a job, because dealing with nature and dealing with live animals, it is such an amazing experience.
Well, I bet there's people in the audience today who are saying, well, I have a little farm. Maybe I should call Shane for help.
Anytime. I have to talk to Elaine Cullicutt, who does my yards, and maybe if I stay home this summer, I can go work with her. That would be lovely for me.
Well, and that sort of leads me to My next question is, what's next for Shane?
You know, both the designers that I love working with are non-committal this year. One of them's working on a hotel. The other one is committed to retiring up in Cape Breton. So for me, I don't know. I might just sit down this year and breathe and just enjoy my summer in Chester because I haven't really fully done it. I did it during COVID, but it was a little more stressful at the time. But I'm really not committed to anything this year, and I'm very happy with that.
Well, great. And, summer in Chester is terrific, but I would say so are fall, winter, and spring.
Absolutely.
And, we always have things going on in the Playhouse that are fun to do. And I sense from just knowing you a tiny short while, Shane, is that the concept of community is very important to you. And
It is.
that's what Chester is.
It absolutely is. You know, people here are extremely conscious of their neighborhood and they really, really want to contribute. And I don't find a lot of communities that do that. You know, Chester is this microcosm. I think it's the most beautiful village in Nova Scotia. You know, nowhere do you get what Chester offers. The people are lovely. Everyone's community minded. Everyone looks after each other. You know, it's idyllic. When you walk around this place, I still pinch myself, you know, that I'm here. It is absolutely a brilliant place to live.
I'm tempted to end on that note, but I want to savor that moment of what you've just said about this village and start the segue to Frankenstein.
Sure.
When this finishes, when our conversation finishes, there's going to be a break and
Yep.
people will sit and watch Frankenstein. What do you want to say to them as they're taking their seat and taking in their first breath and settling in to watch this masterpiece?
It is really an homage to Mary Shelley, the 18-year-old who wrote this in the early 1800s. You know, it is Guillermo's homage to her. It might not be exactly the way the book is, but it is definitely has all the life of what that book is. Really, really enjoy, you know, I'm going to pause for a second because what I really want to say is that it's an homage to human nature. It is an homage to all everyone wants in life, whether they admit it or not, is to be loved. And this is a really good case of human nature and the way we want to be. And it is heart wrenching to watch the creatures search for love on the basis of levels, but it really is the primitive aspect of who we are. And in today's world, this is really what we want. And I really wish people would come back to this because I think the world would be a much better place.
Amen, Shane.
Amen.
Thank you so much for sharing so much of you with us. And you, the person, and you, the craftsperson, and just everything that you do. And I hope people enjoy the movie. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. And I really hope to be able to meet people through the village this summer. And if you are around, please, please say hello. And it really is an honor to be here tonight. And it really is an honor to be here interviewed by you. It really was a pleasure meeting you yesterday. And I hope that I see you a lot more this summer.
We'll work on it. It's a deal. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.